1, 2, 3, 4.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Welcome back. The 2021 Virginia Solar Summit Day 2 is begun. We're full ahead of steam. I hope you enjoyed that last block. That's really exciting to see, federal and state government working so easily together and so casually. I think in this space, it's a unique opportunity, and they teed us up our next session perfectly. We're really putting the best forward. One of our feature issues this year is pollinators. But I think about it really as green fields, and maybe we need a bigger category to think about everything that is possible on these sites. It's not just bees and butterflies. I see already one of our speakers has beautiful sheep in the background. So the term of art to Google, to write down: agrivoltaics, beehives, sheep, and more. And we've got a terrific panel of experts. And I'm going to pick on Carrie Hearn. Am I introducing everybody, or are you introducing everybody, Carrie? Because you really helped put this panel together.
Sure, I can help tee it up, and then we're really going to pass it over to Ivy Main from the Sierra Club, who is going to help facilitate the panel today. But this is one of my, personal favorite topics, sort of off to the side, but it's kind of growing and brewing and emerging as the solar industry really launches in Virginia and grows up and expands. It was really great to hear this morning's remarks. I'm just totally inspired and a little bit speechless in terms of the level of leadership that we're hearing from the Federal Department of Energy and from our other agencies here in Virginia, from Secretary of Natural Resources, and all of these go hand in hand. And speaking of hand in hand, we're talking about the application of agriculture and solar. We're going to talk a little bit about the role of sheep in our solar systems and how they can provide long-term benefits to not only reduce operations and maintenance costs, but also improve soil health and other co-benefits. Improve the nature of how we see agriculture in the community going forward to keep the farm in solar farms. So we have a great group of panelists. I'm actually not going to spend too much time on introductions, but like I said, we have Ivy Main, who's going to help facilitate. Ivy's with the Sierra Club. We have Lexi Hain from the American Solar Grazing Association and a sheep farmer herself on solar lands. We have Dr. Ajun Makhijani, and I will ask Arjun to introduce himself. We have Dr. Lee Daniels from Virginia Tech. And myself, I'm Carrie Hearn. I am the Associate Director of Energy Equity Programs at the Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy, which is our Virginia State Energy Office. And I'm the former Solar Program Manager. And just a personal note, I grew up on a 300-acre farm up in rural West Virginia. We had a lot of sheep on that farm. And I'm wearing my favorite wool sweater today. I think wool is a very sustainable product and sort of a heritage crop, if you will, that I think we can see more applications across the board. And then I just have to say, my uncle is a professional sheep shearer, so I have a lot of sheep in my family. And so it's a little bit of a personal favorite topic for me. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ivy, and please, everyone, reintroduce yourself. Tell us a little bit more about your work and your perspective on the topic.
I'm Ivy Main. I am the Renewable Energy Co-Chair for the Virginia chapter of the Sierra Club. And we're very excited about the transition to zero carbon energy and a zero carbon economy. And when I first heard about agrivoltaics, I got so excited because it really encapsulates what it is we want to see as we do this transition. Instead of just changing from one source of energy, in the case dirty fossil fuels, to a clean energy, if we put people and the planet in the center of our planning, we don't just change energy sources, but we give all of these benefits to society and to the planet. So this is just a beautiful example of ways that we can add value and make life better for people rather than just doing one big project after another. And so, I mean, if you combine solar with sheep, or we talked a lot about pollinators yesterday. There's a lot of experiments with growing row crops. All of these are great examples of how we can make solar look and feel like an agricultural resource rather than like an industrial project. And that's particularly important because we're going to need thousands and thousands of megawatts of solar during this energy transition. And people are already concerned that they don't want to lose their farmlands. So it's really important that communities accept solar, and that it is a way that communities benefit beyond just the landowner making money, that local businesses in the area also benefit, that the farmers are helped by pollinators, that shepherds get a benefit, that the soil improves. So this is, for us, this is just such a great way to bring in these other benefits and put people and planet at the center of our planning. That's really, I got excited about it and started talking to other people, and was so fortunate that Carrie was interested in this, and that we have the American Solar Grazing Association. I was just thrilled that Lexi had started this fantastic organization. I'm going to turn it back to Carrie right now, and ask you please to tell us, what is the Commonwealth's interest in this idea, and how does it fit with what Virginia's doing?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think you touched on a lot of the topics in terms of making solar really a great application in any locality, and addressing some of the community's concerns that may be coming from the agricultural industry in terms of the loss of those lands, and the potential impacts that has when you pull agriculture out of the system, how that impacts the microeconomies around that system in terms of how it's impacting the local farm feed stores and other economic contributors to the agricultural industry. And so we're looking across the board at the whole system, and how do we ensure that we can meet our mid-century clean energy goals. That is a legal mandate for us to implement solar energy across the Commonwealth to reduce our climate impacts and to create economic benefits across the board. And I am working on our local resources in terms of how we can provide localities with the best sets of information that they can review when they're reviewing local applications for solar permits. And through the SolSmart program, again, we kind of look across the board around comprehensive planning and zoning and ordinances, and understand that there are challenges, but I think these are all things that we can overcome. In terms of the State Energy Office's role, we're in a great position to tap into some of those research and development, research and innovation grants that may be coming forward from the Department of Energy or other offices at the federal level, and in turn working with our higher education universities to really create pilot programs to potentially help launch some of these demonstration sites so that we can dispel some of the mythology. We can really test some of the questions that may be a concern. We can really, make it clear that having sheep on a site is very different than maybe some person's conception around what a goat might do around, chewing on wires and those kinds of things. So these are very different applications, and it may be obvious to some, but it may be very confusing to others, and there may be sort of misunderstanding. So we want to be able to provide that type of information in ways that both localities, solar developers, utilities, people can have access to the information and understand the key benefits and how it's going to help us meet our mid-century goals. I know there are a lot of questions around the tax status or other types of questions, and we can help play a role in, deciphering what's what and creating those packets of information to answer those questions and not have, concern or confusion around that topic.
I hadn't even thought about tax implications, so that's getting in deep. So we are fortunate to have Lexi Hain here, who's the executive director of the American Solar Grazing Association. And Lexi, I think you'll be able to tell us, how does this work?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Ivy. I have some slides also. Is this the time for slides so I could show people?
Yes.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I figured out that this was actually a thing that worked, because in North Carolina, just to your south, people have been solar grazing, and people, I actually attended a training recommended by North Carolina State Extension for people interested in solar grazing. And so just letting you, your state just to your south is where I learned about it, because, they have the second most ground mounted solar in the United States. So I really owe credit to them, because I was a farmer in upstate New York who had sold my horticultural business. I support renewable energy. I'd been doing work in that space as well, but largely as a volunteer. And I was looking for an opportunity. And my farm here is located near Cornell University. Cornell is a land grant institution, and Cornell was building out solar. So me and several other people who were largely farmers, but also some researchers, decided to found this not-for-profit together. And it turns out it's taken off, but I'm here to just help this audience understand a little bit of the mechanics of how it works, and why it's actually reasonably important to understand that, because this is something where these two industries, agriculture and the renewable energy industry, really, have a great opportunity to work together, a remarkable opportunity. So these photos are all photos that I have either taken or had taken, largely in upstate New York. So just a sense of, the scale. These are typical ground-mounted photovoltaics. The picture on the left, these are some of my spring lambs headed out to pasture. And the picture on the right, those are some adult Texels, and they're actually kind of parading through the site at a site near Albany, New York. So what we have, solar grazing, we define as grazing livestock to manage the vegetation at solar arrays, but it can be a lot more than that. Could you show the next slide? And the 4 key points for this audience and sort of why sheep at solar are, the first is, the sheep have a bunch of those compatible behaviors. As Carrie was referencing, goats might be very, very sweet animals and very curious, but some parts of their personality are simply not compatible with solar infrastructure. So sheep both have the right temperament and the right behaviors, and also they fit. Here you can see on the left, a ewe kind of delighted in the shade of the, the mid-afternoon. So what you see is that the animals actually improve their welfare and well-being by, selecting for the most comfortable parts of the solar as the days pass. The second thing would be, managed grazing, and it keeps the sun on the panels. Now, managed grazing There are a lot of people with great grazing expertise. Some of them work for NRCS, one of your USDA agencies. They're private grazing consultants, but managed grazing is a kind of grazing where there's control over the system and there's planning. Everyone needs this. They need it to be able to figure out how many sheep you need in a certain part of the solar array at a certain time. But you also need it so that if you're a farmer like me, I know how many sheep I'm going to put out in a certain paddock at a certain time. So what it does is it gives the system some control, and it kind of reassures also your solar company partners that this is something that, you know, you have the mechanics worked out, so this works. Third, a really neat part about this, and some of this ties to conservation grazing, is that, you know, really unlike, you know, a system that might be managed by landscapers, you really can do things to set goals and then improve biodiversity when you're using this system. So there's a whole field there, and I understand you did pollinators yesterday, but all of these systems can work together if you set those goals for land management. Fourth, farmer partnerships. Why do you think I spent all this time talking about this? Because it really is a wonderful opportunity for farmers if this is all done right. And farmers, especially those with livestock experience or those looking to diversify their operations, have this unique opportunity to participate in this clean energy movement. Next slide. And to be clear about that, this is a paid fee-for-service operation that we generally recommend, and we have a lot of resources on our website to help people understand why that is. Just to give you a lens on where solar grazing is occurring, it tends to overlap with where the solar build-out is. So those are those blue states in 2020. And in terms of those pink states, those are states that we have members in, or I've had conversations with people, and we are going to see more solar grazing in those states. What's interesting to me is I think we have, someone asked me yesterday, how many acres are in solar grazing in the United States? And I had to say, well, I think it's 12 to 15,000, I think. And so we do actually really need a funded study to really document this. What I can tell you is that certainly the rate of those acres is likely to increase substantially over the next few years if this is done right. But yes, I also show this map to show you that, you know, all climates, this can work. So Hawaii, there's actually a number of solar grazers, as well as now we see like Vermont, New York, or Oregon. Next slide. Something that the National Renewable Energy Lab is trying to classify, and these are their slides, are what are the other words in terms around dual use and co-location. So the ones that we see most commonly are on the top tier here. We have our solar grazing, we have our just pollinator friendly vegetation plantings, and the work coming out of Fresh Energy around that. But what I also have a picture at the top I'm volunteering is the fact that especially apiaries, solar grazing, and ground mounted PV all come together. We in fact are working to produce a solar beekeeping contract to help people understand those mechanics. The bottom row are all things that are coming in from Europe. They're coming in from research universities in the United States, but I expect to see them working out in the next few years. But there are some exciting innovations in agrivoltaics. I just haven't seen any of those scaled yet, but I'm sure we will. Next slide. So how do you connect if you're a farmer and you want to talk to the energy firms, or you have a grazing business and you think I'm going to do this. So one thing is that we have an app and we have a map, and we are trying to get people to use that because I understand it can be tricky to connect those two sets of individuals. It can be a process, and we're trying to simplify that process. So we want people to understand this is a legitimate business opportunity, and the solar firms want to know who the right people are to contact when they are planning a project, and conversely, the farmers. Next slide. This slide has a lot of words. What I really am trying to say here is when projects are being built, and if you're a farmer, how to reach out to that solar company. And the key message is during that permitting process, there is typically a public face of that permitting process. That's your big opening. I myself recommend the ribbon cutting ceremonies. Go ahead and introduce yourself and bring your card. Invite people back to your farm. And then I know also you can reach out to DMME about this. Thank you. Next slide. So another thing Carrie pointed out that I really agree with is here we have some examples of improvements to solar sites to promote solar grazing. You know, we have the water, which I recommend. We have interior paddock fencing. One thing you'll notice, it might look familiar to you, is that these are some of the same materials you'll be using if it were my own farm. So in terms of investment, one thing that solar grazing really offers is that if you do this right, here we are, we have investment and buying from those same supply chains in these rural towns. We also have the fact that in the winter, the sheep need to go somewhere. They need to eat, they need housing. I have tractors here at the farm. I have a winter feed bills. So that rural fabric, that rural economic fabric is really meshed more tightly together when you support this practice. I will also note in the case of these slides that the solar firm invested in these infrastructure improvements. So one thing to say is when that happens, and I would love to see solar firms, you know, encouraged to do this and perhaps rewarded for that, some kind of financial incentives or some other incentive, less work falls on the back of the farmer. That farmer doesn't have to haul water to their sheep. Next slide. This is, again, these are actually mostly pictures of flocks in New York and Pennsylvania moving around within the solar sites and from site to site. Again, what you see is that you have to have the infrastructure as a farmer to make those mechanics happen. You need a herding dog, you need trucks and trailers, you need portable handling systems. This is all very similar to targeted grazing operations many of you might know of in the West, things used for fire control and invasive species control. Next slide. So a couple areas just to get the audience excited and think, you know, be thoughtful. Here are pictures of one of our member grazers making hay on their solar site as one of the other vegetation management strategies. They are lucky that their site is both like terrain-wise, it's very flat, but also just it was built in a way that allows for haymaking. That offsets their winter feed bill, and it also means that grazing management has a powerful tool to achieve the goals of their contract. So I just mentioned that that's something I haven't seen a lot of attention to, but I'd love to see more innovation there. And again, I'd love to see developers encouraged to facilitate that. Next slide. So as a sheep producer, there are some changes you might want to think about. I classified 3 different systems here of what producers do to accommodate solar grazing. Some lamb on site. These typically are people in northern states. You can see also sometimes accidents happen, which is the lovely lamb on the top left. Second is winter lambing. A bunch of producers are also lambing, have shifted their lambing schedule towards a December through March schedule, and that way you've weaned your lambs and you've sent them out in the spring. And then lastly, you're not lambing at all. You participate in the supply chain by simply buying in lambs in the spring from some other producer, or you're buying in ewes from someone else, or even leasing them. So a lot of innovation happening in this space and people trying to crack the nut a different way. One more slide. And this is also just another one of our members who operates in the Midwest and South. I think he covers 11 states right now, and he manages utility scale solar sites with grazing. It's a family farm owned and operated. They participate with Savory Institute and their standards for land regeneration. And just wanted to kind of leave off with saying that this for their family, this is their full-time bread and butter. And they've just pointing it out as an example of a wonderful innovator who's one of our members. And then lastly, just how to reach us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Lexi. This stuff is so cool. I love watching it. I don't have sheep. I don't have a farm, but but virtually, I get very excited. We're going to turn it over to Dr. Ajun Makhijani, who's the president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research and the author of a new report on the value of solar to Maryland farmers, including the benefits of agrivoltaics. So Arjun, if you are able to get on, I know you've got a little instability in your video there. Okay, take it away. Please tell us more about your work.
You're not going to be able to see me. I'll turn my video on at the end. I'm leaving it off,
okay,
so it won't be interrupted. Kelsey, will you please share my slides? I'm an electrical engineer. I kind of backed into this whole thing, looking at land use for renewable energy and conventional energy, and found this wonderful area to work in. And I took an unusual point of view. I took the point of view that I'm not going to look at solar siting. I'm going to look at it purely from a farm economic point of view and see if it would work. Of course, it has to work for the solar people also. So I'm with the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. You have my email address there. Next slide. So I'm looking at will this work economically for farmers? So I did a number of different case studies. So here's a 1,000-acre corn farm. These are all numbers are specific to Maryland. Much of this particularly would apply to Virginia because it's on a large farm, and you could have utility scale solar or any scale solar, provided the solar economics work, and you could lease it for grazing sheep. So here a farmer has leased their land for 100 acres of their 1,000-acre farm for building solar, and they get a lease revenue. So on the right, you have net profit from from a corn soy rotation. In a good year and a bad year for corn prices. I haven't taken 2020. These are before 2020 prices. And on the left, you have profits that are roughly double the profits. It's not just your profits double, they're resilient profits. So half of the profits in this case, you don't have to go to the bank to borrow money. You just go to the bank to deposit the money. Because it's lease revenues from a pretty stable electricity selling operation. Next slide. So of course, a lot of the profit from solar for the farmer will depend on the lease revenue. So I did a little sensitivity test. So your lease revenues typically could be $500 to $2,000 an acre. But you see in all cases, even in the case where the lease is $500 an acre, you have about a 50% increase in profit relative to no solar. And that 50%, so the advantage of resilient profits is not only that you have more money, but in bad years or very bad years, you could still stay in business. So this is the marriage of solar and agriculture can actually help stabilize family farms and keep them in business. So this is a very exciting part of it. It can also keep it from urban development because the pressure, when you're having a bad year, the pressure to sell is great. Next slide. In Maryland, we also have net metering for farmers. So farmers can install solar on their land up to 2 megawatts and sell electricity to other nonprofits, governments, or farmers. So here I have an example of a little over 5% of the land on a 300-acre dairy operation. So 5.3% of the land. But they sell their electricity at a discount, just a small discount from retail to make it attractive for getting a long-term contract. They actually go to the bank and get a loan to build their own solar. They can get a loan if they get a contract, say, with a state university in advance, so they have an assured revenue stream. This is borrowing at commercial rates. And so you can see that on the right, you have milk-only profits. And these are numbers from University of Maryland Extension for the farming part of the profits. And so it depends on what utility area you're in now, because you're selling electricity at retail and you have to take into account their rates. You can see that even while you're paying off the loan, you have more profit from this net metering system than just from milk. After you've paid off the loan, after 15 years, I assume, your profits will jump greatly, and you can send your kids to college on the solar profits. Next slide. Or buy a new tractor or put it in your retirement account. So the key to economics is the value of commodity corn is about $1,000 an acre, and often it's a lot less. The value of electricity at acre at retail, this is gross revenue, is $25,000 to $30,000 an acre. It might be a little less in Virginia. So you can double your profits or more and have resilient profits. Next slide. I'll show you two slides. So this is a vertical arrangement where you can do more different types of agriculture. Lexi alluded to this, but this needs to be piloted and demonstrated in the United States. And I'm talking with a German company whose slide this is, next to sun.de, to do a pilot in Maryland. And I think it might be very interesting for Virginia also. Next slide. You've seen a lot of sheep with Lexi's slides. What I want to emphasize here is if you have 100 acres in solar, it really is can be almost all be used for agriculture, because the construction footprint of solar is very small, 2% or less of the installation. So you can say when you need 1,000 acres for, so many megawatts of solar, it really is only 10 to 20 acres of that is construction footprint. So more than 950 acres can be used for grazing or other agricultural purposes. Next slide. So you've heard, you can actually increase carbon sequestration and soil health and so on. You've heard about this. This is an actual study of Midwestern solar systems, 30 of them. Next. So I tried to put solar in perspective for Maryland farmland. They say, how much farmland is going to be used, the food production will suffer. Of course, here we're talking about food production. So we have about 2 million acres of farmland in Maryland. About 1.4 million is in cropland. So if you have 100% renewable electricity system with electric vehicles and so on, and half of that is solar and half of the solar is on farmland. So that's the scenario here. You'd need, so 25% of all electricity in an all renewable system, you'd need 80,000 acres, or about 4% of Maryland farmland. Of that, the construction footprint, that bar is hardly visible, about 1,600 acres. And for perspective, Maryland lost over 100,000 acres to development in the 15 years from 2001 to 16. By development, I mean urban and ex-urban development. And I think the next is the last slide. Yeah, so here are the conclusions. You can strengthen your farm profits, improve soil health, diversify food production, strengthen rural communities. I'll put up my report URL in the chat so you can download it, and all of these things are, and provide opportunities for economic justice. The bill that just passed, the stimulus bill, there's been a lot of discussion of Black and Indigenous farmers. Here, you don't have to buy the land. You get paid to use the land if you're grazing. And so that's a very, very important opportunity that we should see. Thank you.
Thank you, Arjun. I think that reminder that only 2% of the footprint of a solar project is really the solar, right? So that's what we're talking about, is how do we best use the other 98%? And
right. And one thing I didn't say is I do advocate that at the end of the solar generation, there should be complete decommissioning. So when I did the economics, I took the cost of decommissioning into account. So the net profit is net of the decommissioning cost.
All right. So we also have with us Dr. Lee Daniels, who's a professor of environmental soil science in the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences at Virginia Tech. He's been doing research on the effects of solar on soils, and is going to talk to us a little bit about his work. So I will turn it over to you, Lee.
So thanks much. I want to make sure folks can see my screen here. Is that true?
Yep. You're in.
Okay. Hi, I'm going to talk a little bit about soils. I'm actually standing in for John Ignash, who is a biosystems engineer with us at Virginia Tech, who's been really organizing what we've been doing for the past year. And the first slide here is John's, and it's just sort of announcing the fact that we have about 15 faculty here at the university who've been really sort of coalesced with John's leadership in the past year to look at a range of topics associated particularly with utility scale solar issues. We've had a couple seminars so far. This has been funded by the college and the university, so we're actually getting operating dollars out of this now, which is great. So we're focused on it. And the important point here is I just want to point out that at the bottom of the screen here, you can see all of the units involved. And I can assure you this is a big issue for us. We're really looking at this and focusing on this and trying to interface both with the consulting industries out there and others involved at scale with this. And that if folks want to get into or involved with this, if they will email me or email John, we'll be glad to involve you in it. And on the right-hand side, if you see here sort of an empty blackboard that says priorities, that's because we're still trying to figure these things out in terms of what we're really going to focus on. We know some obvious issues, which we've obviously talked about here, but we just started with this. We just got this funded and set up with our college here this month. So then we're here, I'm happy about this. And we are Virginia's land grant university, and it's obviously something we should be actively involved in. All right, let me get to changing here. The other project that is just getting off the ground is run by Dr. Ron Myers. This is actually being funded and supported out of our the Coastal Studies Center. And you can see here on the right-hand side some of the folks who are involved, but their focus really is looking at this intersection between land development or conversion to utility solar versus habitat, particularly avian fauna issues, and policy. And so you can see the people who are involved with this. I'm not deeply involved with this one, but another person named John Fike is, and John Ignash is. And so it's just another example of fact that we are focusing here at the university and trying to look from a statewide perspective at what's the intersection of issues when we start taking literally tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of acres into what might be seen as land use conversion, but then what are the actual habitat issues and other biodiversity issues and local policy issues and regulatory policies issues with that. So that's a real quick one there. I really enjoyed the earlier presentation on sheep. And I know that sheep was our topic here. I do want to point out we have a fellow named John Fike, who is a forage specialist in our school, the School of Plant and Environmental Sciences. John, it turns out, John and a PhD student of his named Gabe Pent, who is still working with us, not working in solar, but working in systems called agroforestry, years ago started looking at what are the benefits of shade to sheep production facilities and what are the offsets between, and this is the example on the right-hand side, which is at our Kentland Research Farm, when you interplant agroforestry systems with sheep and forage management systems. And do we get happy sheep or not? Let me put it that way. And do they gain weight? And the answer is yes, they do. But there's obviously going to be an offset between the fact that you're shading out a certain level of the forage productivity of your system. And so that's what John has worked on. And so here's to some of his slides. And you can get lost in his data here. If you contact me, I'll be glad to get you in touch with John. But basically what you find is that depending on the system and how it's set up, you may or may not actually reduce forage yield, but you definitely, by providing the shading, you will get higher yield in the sheep and lambs. And it's really a management issue like was talked about earlier. In an agroforestry model, you're actually gaining income from, at some point in time, a forest product as well. Obviously, in a solar farm, a management environment, you're offsetting forage management, sheep, and selling energy. But John's work and Gabe Pence's work is directly related to this. We're very interested in this overall and looking at how do you combine the infrastructure, particularly of these larger scale solar arrays, with various types of forage and silvo management systems. Finally, I'm a soil scientist. I'm a dirt guy is what I do, okay? And my interest for the past year, and I've been getting a lot of phone calls and Dan, a lot of emails on this. I have worked for 40 years on mineland reclamation, highway corridor work, urban reclamation, and I've been getting a lot of questions about, okay, as we, take a given piece of property, 20 acres, 30 acres, sometimes 2,000 acres, we take it out of its existing land use and whatever its existing level of agricultural productivity is, what are going to be the management issues and the remediation issues. And all I can say is, regardless of what system you ever look at in the world, it doesn't matter where you are, the dominant issue you're going to deal with is soil compaction. And even in these solar farm installations, you can't install infrastructure at this level and not have issues with compaction at some level. And so we just need to understand that. Can also say I've been fielding a lot of questions and dealing with what is the net effect of having X amount of the area under panels in terms of how we're estimating stormwater runoff. And to what extent we deal with those as pervious or impervious, and how that affects the size of stormwater basins and other regulatory constraints, particularly within the Chesapeake Bay watershed, is an active question that obviously influences both state oversight and particularly local oversight, particularly where we're dealing with, a conditional zoning. So I'm going to leave that alone, just saying that there are questions out there, and I will go on. Finally, when we do the process of just installing the infrastructure, we're going to dig down, generally expose subsoils. Subsoils in Virginia are generally acidic and need lime and fertilizer. And if we don't do a really good job of saving topsoil and getting it back on those areas effectively, we have productivity problems with it. And in a few limited areas, fortunately not many to my knowledge with solar farming yet, we do have a particularly nasty condition in Virginia called acid sulfate soils. And if you dig down deep enough and bring those materials up to the surface, your liming rates go up by a factor of 10. And if those materials are in direct contact with your infrastructure, particularly galvanized and metal, their lifetime, which you're thinking is 25 or 30 years, is probably going to be 2 or 3 years. So there are issues with those materials at this point in time, from what I can tell, fairly limited. And the final question, which Arjun actually spoke to earlier, is the whole concept in the zoning on these sites is assuming that in 25 or 30 years, we're going to go in there, pull out all this infrastructure, and then presumably rehabilitate it or restore it back into some similar level of productivity. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that it's not doable. And in fact, we certainly advocate that you are going to co-manage the majority of these areas over time in hopefully some productive level of agriculture. But those areas that are direct cut and fill are going to take some level of rehabilitation. And I've worked on this now, like I said, for almost 40 years. And our best evidence is where you do have significant disturbance in direct cut and fill, you're probably looking at a best return level of maybe 85% or more. Or less, let me put it that way. If we get 85, 90%, we're doing well. And I will stop at that point.
Thank you. I think that's, we're going to be interested in seeing how that research goes, these pilot projects. But I would also hope that if you are doing pollinator plantings and having sheep management with sheep fertilizing your vegetation, that we get improved soil over time and maybe come out at the end of the project better than you would if you weren't doing this, right?
Yeah, and I'm gonna cut us off there. I know we're running the clock. We have so many more questions and things that we could be talking about on this topic. We'll certainly try to help facilitate some of those maybe in the Q&A later today. But I want to leave one nugget for the solar developers who are listening in and kind of tie it back to the benefit to the solar developers around offsetting those long-term operations and maintenance costs that may be more conventional models around, taking mowers out and, kind of doing that conventional model. So we can really offset those costs. I think this can be more economically beneficial to the solar developer and to the utility who's actually operating that facility in many cases over the life of the project. So thank you so much to all of the presenters, to Ivy for doing a great job of facilitating, and to all of the researchers. This is really juicy stuff, and I look forward to reading all the reports and participating going forward.
Thank you, Carrie. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Yeah, terrific. Carrie, Lexi, Ivy, Dr. Daniels, Dr. Makhijani, just the best stuff in the world. We really need more of this. So especially, the solar panel standing up only using 2% of the land area of the site, leaving 98% for the sheep, shade plants, and potentially mushrooms. I think, this is the future. So, and we saw a question in the chat just before I get to the next session about, what do we do in 20 or 30 years? And I think Ivy brought up a really good point too. I grew up in farmland, and it wouldn't be maybe a bad idea to put some land into fallow use. And these are really just long-term interim uses, by Mother Earth's clock, this is nothing, so yeah, we'll give it a rest and put the bees, butterflies, and sheeps to work. Thank you so much, guys. Really, really great stuff. And we're really happy that this panel in particular could start our substantive program off so strong. All their presentations will be shared. You can keep the questions firing. We'll be coming back to that both later in the day in the expert wraps at the end, but also we'll be producing all the questions and answers in the knowledge binder that will go out as takeaway next week. So thank you all. I know this group too, they have some bonus slides and other things in their materials, and we really look forward to that.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.